You're listening to The Secrets of Sacred Art, where we unearth the hidden treasures, history, and deeper meanings in religious and sacred art. We're your hosts, Alix Murray.
And I'm Kathryn Laffrey. Welcome to episode 24, our first Secrets of Sacred Art feature artist. In this episode, we'll be talking with Daniel Mitsui to see how he incorporates Celtic art and other styles to create his unique and beautiful images. Please follow The Secrets of Sacred Art in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, your favorite podcast app. And for a fuller experience, you can join us on the SQPN YouTube channel, where you can see all the images we are discussing in the show. You can find us on social media at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, on X at SQPN, or on Instagram at StarQuest Network. So today, Alix, we have Daniel Mitsui with us. And Daniel Mitsui is an artist known for his meticulous, detailed ink drawings made entirely by hand on paper or vellum. Most of his artworks are religious in subject. He draws inspiration from Gothic illuminated manuscripts, panel drawings, tapestries, as well as from Celtic and Japanese and Persian art. He desires to make his art that is faithful to tradition, yet strikingly original and vigorously medieval in spirit. Daniel is a formal poet, a prolific designer of typefaces, which are gorgeous, surface patterns, and ornaments. He lives in Indiana with his wife and their 4 children. And welcome, Daniel Mitsui.
Hello.
Welcome, Daniel.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're excited to have you on the show. I first heard of you quite some time ago through Father Z's blog. And once I saw your work, I was just enthralled by it. And actually, it helped motivate me to work more in sacred art. So thank you. I'd like to know, what was your journey as an artist? Like, when did you first begin your art career, and have you been drawing all your life?
Yes, I have. I've been drawing, since I was a small child. And really, since I was a small child, I have been interested in very detailed sort of artwork, and especially in medieval art. I remember when I was, maybe 5 or so, I saw certain picture books, certain movies that had a medieval style. Those are the ones that I really found most appealing. And when I was maybe 14 or so, I saw pictures of illuminated manuscripts. Not ones in person, but reproductions in books. And those made a very strong impact on me. I'd say especially the Cairo page from the Lindisfarne Gospels was one that I encountered in a calligraphy instruction book that I saw about that age. And that is a style that I pursued somewhat. In the following years, I moved into different types of artwork. For a while, I was pretty fixated on sort of surrealist artwork, particularly that of Max Ernst. I was interested in cartooning. I studied some film animation. And so those were some of the various things that I experimented with when I was, adolescent or during college years. And it was when I was about 22 that I really took up religious practice very seriously and decided that I wanted to revisit my first love, which was medieval art, and which was more fascinating to me because of the religious aspects of it that I had not understood as fully, earlier in my life. And so that was around 2004 or so, and from there I built up a portfolio and created a website, started selling some artwork, taking commissions, and I was able to make that my livelihood at around 2010, I think. About 2010. And stylistically, I think that my early religious artwork was still had many of the characteristics that my artwork from my student years had. There were definite influences from modern art and from cartooning. And so there was probably a span, maybe 2004 to 2010, where I was trying to focus it more on medieval Gothic art and to understand that style and to make it more purely that. And since then, it's been more of an expansion of saying, I think I understand this style to a certain extent. Now I want to bring other things into it.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, so I want to add to the stage one of your images here. This is one of the first ones that I saw when I had perused through Father Z's blog. It came up that this one was one of the first ones that I saw and got fixated on, mostly because of a certain pattern that you put in there that I had picked up on right away. I actually emailed you about it because I was so surprised.
Stone, right?
The Petoskey stone, yes. So it was kind of fascinating too, because at the time I was working a job where I did decorative painting on magnets, a small little company I was working for, and they were fixated with trying to master the Petoskey stone pattern. This helped us get it right, and one of our most popular products had a nice little Petoskey pattern on it, and you helped with that. So, yeah, so that was really fun. But I'm just curious, like, what inspired you to add these detailed elements of nature into the style of artwork, like how it enhances our understanding of God?
Well, I think that it started with me just being drawn to intricate patterns. And you see a lot of very intricate patterns in certain natural forms. And the sort of artwork that I was doing before I turned to religious art, a lot of it had a particular sort of background fill to it, where I would fill entire space with tiny little, there would be seashells, there would be cell organelles, there would be coral, sometimes dinosaur eggs. It was sort of my signature pattern when I was, between the ages of, say, 20 and 25 or so. That was what I used for most of my decoration. And I was constantly adding things to it. So I think the Petoskey stone was something I encountered later, and I really liked the way it looked and made that one of the things that I would put into that mix. So it didn't start out with a deliberate religious theological symbolism. I think that this type of imagery is very fitting to religious art. I think... Well, I found a quotation. It was actually from an artist whose work I did a little bit of work translating in an older job of mine, but his name was Felix Granda, and he was writing about using sort of microbiological ornament all the way back in 1911, where he said, you make out these... Wait, that's the wrong quote. Where he said... more powerful images have never come to an artist's imagination, and should we not take advantage of this in order to make our decorations more rich and more varied, and to teach the truth contained in the psalm, "O Lord, thy thoughts are exceeding deep." So I think it fits very well with religious artwork, but its origins were a little older than that. It was more for the visual appeal that I started drawing these type of things.
Nice. Yeah, it's interesting how God draws us, and even elements we weren't initially associating with him. I kind of came into sacred art via wildlife art. And so I wasn't even thinking at first, and then it's just God just kept pointing to, hey, this can work for me.
Yeah, I was just thinking, just hearing you speak, Daniel, about how a lot of times a particular style that you see in a culture, what's wonderful about sacred art is it transcends something that was good. You're working these patterns into your artwork as you said, to kind of fill space. But then once you layer this this transcendent idea on top of it, the idea of God and the Creator, all of that gets raised up. And so you can use what was there already, but now it has a greater purpose. And I just think it's fantastic. And Kathryn and I are major animal nerds, I guess. And so to be able to look, I just love the presence of all of creation within this image of the Sacred Heart. I just think it's gorgeous.
Yeah, what is the little creature that I highlighted in that small red image?
Oh, well, there's a pangolin there. There's a seahorse. There's a lot of things in this one. It's one of the underlying principles of certainly of Gothic art, of sort of high medieval sacred art, that God is reflected not only in the scriptures, but in the book of nature. That's the second book written by God's hand. And so you see, for example, the bestiaries, these books of symbolism that explain how the behavior of animals symbolizes the life of Christ, or the virtues, things with religious that we know from religion. And I've read the bestiary, and some of its symbols, and these are the most famous ones, are very profound. Many of them are not nearly as impressive in terms of how the authors read theological significance into particular animals. But I think the idea of finding God reflected in nature is what is really important there, more than the specific symbols of specific animals, some of which are based on beliefs that are not really observed in animals if you study them more closely. Sort of like, for example, one of the most famous ones is the pelican wounding its own breast to feed its chicks. That's a beautiful religious symbol. You see it in the liturgy, Thomas Aquinas's office for Corpus Christi. You see it in church art, but nobody has observed a pelican doing this in recent years, and so it probably was a mistaken, sort of a zoological mistake initially. But the idea of looking at animals and trying to find these sort of symbols is still valid. And so if we look at pelicans now, with all of our knowledge that we have of them, through greater and more detailed observation, we could still find those symbols, and we could look at animals that did not make it into the bestiaries and find that symbolism there also. And so when I draw a picture, I'm not, in a medieval style, I'm not trying to limit my knowledge of the world to that of the Middle Ages. So I'm fine with, you can see you can see the platypus there, you can see the lyrebirds, the chameleons. These are not all animals that would have been known before the Age of Exploration to Christian artists. But nowadays we know about them all, and we can look at them and can find significance in them. And so, for example, a chameleon and a lyrebird, a lyrebird is one of the great mimics of the animal kingdom. It can imitate almost any sound, and so you can combine that with a chameleon and say, this is an animal that contains all colors, this is an animal that contains all sounds, this is sort of a symbol of universality of God.
Nice.
You put it in a picture of Jesus that shows that he has sovereignty over the entirety of creation, including the entirety of color and sound, of these abstract things. In terms of like the pangolin and the platypus, those were a little less well thought out. They were more just favorite animals of mine, but I thought that they are the sort of creatures that's a plant or an animal or a mammal or a bird, and so a way of saying like using it as
maybe God's ways are above our ways. That's what
in this particular case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking like
God's
the platypus.
imagination.
How the platypus really stumped people when it showed up, when it was discovered. Maybe this is like God's ways are above our ways. We don't always understand him.
Yeah.
And if people want to go back, our episode 15, we did jump into some of the menagerie of animals out there, didn't we, Alix?
Yep, and we're gonna visit the menagerie again. So this is excellent. This is
so
actually
we have been focusing on Celtic art this season. It's going to be the focus for the rest of the season. And you had mentioned the Lindisfarne Cairo, and you did a beautiful Christ and Majesty with the Cairo here. Was that actually based off of the Lindisfarne Cairo?
Yeah. I encountered that Lindisfarne Cairo, maybe in 1996 or so. And I don't want to say if this was continuous, but from the time that I saw that, I started just experimenting, trying to draw this particular style of ornament and decoration and knotwork. It had an immediate appeal, but I didn't really understand how it was done. And I didn't go to say a reference or an instruction book to figure that out, because there are some good instruction books on, mastering Celtic knotwork by breaking it down mathematically. For me, I tried to sort of figure it out just with my hands, just by drawing through trial and error. And it took me, until about I think it was about 2010 that I kind of figured it out and was able to do what I thought was a pretty good imitation of it, which is not this specific drawing, but it's one very similar that I did that was smaller. And then this one that you have on the screen is sort of a larger version of it, but with the same composition. And yes, the Lindisfarne Cairo was the major source of inspiration there, which is probably to this day my favorite work of art, if I had to choose one.
This is your favorite work of art that you've produced yourself, or are you saying the Lindisfarne Gospels is your favorite work of art?
I would say the Lindisfarne Cairo. The Lindisfarne Cairo would be my favorite work of art if you had to ask me just to choose one that's most meaningful to me.
Which one you'd like to spend forever with?
Right.
Yeah. So I have a question.
Hopefully I would get a choice of more than one, but...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we it's interesting. We just finished an episode on the Book of Kells, and at the end we show several different Cairo images that are a little bit older and some around the same age as the Book of Kells, and I think we used the Lindisfarne one, didn't we? Yeah. So, but. No, this has been just a neat adventure that we're on this season. But I want to encourage people to go. Well, we'll give all this information in the links in the show links or in the show notes with your website, Daniel. But I took the opportunity to read some of your lectures, and I thought they were great. And so I want to encourage our viewers to do the same. So I just got onto your website, and I just put lecture in the search bar, and all of them came up, and I just kind of had a nice choice of some really, really good lectures. And I was reading your lecture on the heavenly outlook, and I have to say, I agree with you 100% when you say that beauty is not something to be viewed as datum. And I think a lot of people try to reduce the Celtic art form down to a formula. And sometimes when you're looking at the different techniques of how to draw the knots and everything, it does come down to it becomes very formulaic, and then I think you miss the mystery of it, if I can say that. And can you just share some of your thoughts? I mean, I know they were in the lecture, but I'd love to hear you kind of share a little bit about what might be some of the perils and pitfalls in looking at art almost in a scientific way. And because especially sacred art, and I think sometimes people do that, and it's almost it's almost on the other end of the spectrum of someone walking into a Gothic cathedral and going, "Oh, I don't like that." Although I've never met anybody who said that, but to try to rather than it being completely subjective, then it becomes something purely functional and trying to understand it in a scientific way, pick it apart. Yeah. So if that makes any sense, if you could just talk about maybe the better way to view sacred art.
Well, I should start by saying I'm not really a philosopher, so I don't speak with a sort of philosophic vocabulary. But from my experience as an artist, I think that there is an error of thinking that is very common in the modern world, which is that in order for a thing to be objectively anything, that's the same as saying that it's quantifiable. That in order for something to be objective, it has to be described by a number. And we're in the habit of using numbers to describe all sorts of very complicated concepts that don't really reduce to a number. Probably the most famous and obvious one would be something like intelligence, which is a very complicated and there are many variables into what we call intelligence, but we're used to saying, well, let's just make a single test and give people a number. And when you do that, you lose anything that doesn't anything that's recalcitrant to numerical description gets dismissed as unimportant, not because it's unimportant, but because it's difficult to test and difficult to describe that way.
Exactly.
And so I think when you approach art that way, your mind is trying to evaluate it by putting a number on it or to sort it into a definite category rather than to learn from it, really. And so I think that when this sort of habit that people get into, especially when they spend a lot of time on the internet, of ranking everything or rating everything. When people have that habit and they encounter art, that's where their minds go, and that's what they think about. And once they do that, then they move on very often. And I fall into that habit too, is that, it's possible to look through a great quantity of pictures and say, oh, I like that one, I don't like that one, I like that one, I don't like that one. These are my 5 favorites. And if that's how you're used to engaging with art, then you don't spend as much time with it. And you don't really absorb those aspects of it that can't really be described in numerical terms. And I honestly think there's a lot of art that really resists verbal description as well. And that's something I talk about, or I've said to people, is that, earlier in my career, I was in the habit of, when I would look at art, I was sort of constantly writing an essay about it in my head, thinking, how can I describe this? And so when I'm always writing an essay about it in my head, people ask me about artwork. I've got all this sort of written material in my brain that I can say very readily, and I think sound very intelligent. And I found that the longer that I'm a working artist, the less interesting I am to listen to talk about art. It's because I tend to skip the verbalization. I try to absorb the artwork visually and then make that come out of me as new art without going through the intermediate step of turning it into an essay or into a numerical ranking. And so that makes it a little harder to discuss art, actually, because sometimes it's not something that I can put into words as easily because I haven't made much of an effort to do so. But I think for actually making art, that's the more important way in which an artist absorbs the influence of things that he sees.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of fits
Thank
right
you.
into
Yeah,
this next image. The first one here is actually one that we showed in our previous episode, right from the Book of Kells. And then we have your Celtic Virgin Mary with child. And I was just wondering, what do you like to, how do you approach reimagining a historical work into your style? Because one thing you did was something that our professor, David Clayton, when he talked about the Book of Kells, actually wished someone would fix on the image from the Book of Kells, and that was having Christ face out and look directly at the people, giving us his full face. So I was just wondering, what was your thoughts on reimagining this historic work?
Well, the biggest change that I made when making my own drawing is that mine is very small. It's only probably less than 2 inches across. It's obviously based on the Kells Madonna, but in miniature. And I've met David, and I think I've had at least one exchange with him about his belief about the full front facing icons and in these manuscripts. And I don't know that I agree with that. I think that it's perfectly fine to use the composition that you have here in order to show, relationships between the figures within it. I do draw a lot of images that are a figure facing directly forward and staring straight out. And it's not really my preference, but that's more for visual reasons than theological ones. I find that sometimes that that sort of rigidly symmetrical composition can be less effective than one that is symmetrical or balanced in, I guess, more subtle ways.
Mm-hmm.
And when I approach a historic style, there's two approaches that I take when doing that. One is to create something that looks very much like it is a continuation of the tradition that I'm imitating, which is what I've done here. I'm trying to make something that could pass as early medieval Northumbro-Irish art. Sometimes I do that with Japanese-styled art, with Persian art, with Gothic art. In those cases, I am trying to understand the style better and to learn it, and hopefully to do that well enough that I can undertake a more creative composition in that style in a way that seems authentic. That is something that I do for sometimes because I'm commissioned to do so, sometimes because I'm trying to learn something for my own benefit, and occasionally because I just find it enjoyable to try a new approach. But what I really like to do more, and what I think is more important, is to take certain lessons or aspects of these different historical styles and integrate them into what I would consider my signature style, the one that I feel most that I'm being myself artistically and saying and doing the things, or sort of communicating the things that I most want to communicate, is a hybrid style that is more based on, Northern European late Gothic than anything else, but has integrated elements of East Asian and Persian and Celtic art into it. So you'll see a number of drawings, if you look through my portfolio, where there is a more or less Gothic composition, more or less Gothic approach to the figures. but with a lot of Celtic, Northumbro-Irish, insular, early medieval ornament in the borders, in the textiles, in the backgrounds, in fabric patterns and things like that. Because that really is what I think is most distinctly wonderful about the insular style. Certainly, its figures are formalized to a point where they're not particularly versatile. And there's also not a whole lot of figurative art in these manuscripts either. You look at the Lindisfarne Gospels, and aside from the evangelist portraits, it's mostly ornamental and calligraphic. And so I think that the ornament and the calligraphy is what I draw most inspiration from, what I think is the most valuable thing to me. Including just a very distinctive understanding of contour. I think one of the things that I like best about the Cairo pages from the Lindisfarne Gospels is just its outline. The way that there's certain curvatures and the way that they transition from one to another is very distinctive, and I think that more than anything else is what has influenced every drawing that I have made from that point onward to some extent.
Interesting.
So those are the things I like to take out of this style. I know we keep saying Celtic, and that's the common term. It's a little bit of a misnomer because that makes it sound like it belongs to one particular ethnic group or one particular school of religious thought, and I don't think that's entirely accurate. But in art history, we use terms like Gothic and Romanesque all the time that don't really mean what they literally do.
It's
so
something.
That's fine.
I think it's like a point. It's a point of familiarity. I think that people try to. It's like a nomenclature, I guess. But I have a question. So, in doing this style of art that we know as Celtic, what was like the most surprising thing that you discovered as you were learning this technique?
The most surprising thing was to learn just how cosmopolitan of a style it is. Because I think that it's the popular imagination of Celtic art, associates it very specifically with Ireland. It's something that you mostly see as like a mark of Irish identity, even to the point where it becomes kind of a little bit of a kitsch style, where it's on knickknacks, little paddywhack pub signs and things, so with all these knots around the edges. And so it's thought of as being this very specifically Irish style, and it definitely is an Irish style. But if you look at, just to use the example of the Cairo page again, you have a text written by a Jew writing in Greek, and it's translated into Latin, and except for the initials of the nomen sacrum, which are still in Greek, and the script is a combination of this distinctly insular interpretation of the uncial letters, which was a Greek style of calligraphy, which was invented by Greek-speaking Christians in Egypt, and that's sort of merged with, and then the capital letters are very obviously influenced by the Anglo-Saxon runes. And then you have, some of these decorative motifs that come from the broader culture of Germanic and Northern European decorative art. And you have also these carpet pages, which are just, areas that are filled entirely with ornament. And, there's some disagreement among art historians as to what influenced this. I know there's one, Volkmar Ganshorn, who has said that he thinks that this is ultimately derived from the art of Christian Armenia, which he thinks was perhaps transmitted through the influence of Theodore of Tarsus, who later became Archbishop of Canterbury, and who was familiar with, Armenian and Syriac and Byzantine and Roman culture, and eventually wound up in the middle of this in the British Isles in the 7th century. And there are other art historians who think that this is a Coptic influence, and that might seem a little outlandish, but there is real archaeological evidence that there was communication between Christian Egypt and Christian Ireland in the early Middle Ages. I mean, there are artifacts that support that thesis. And in addition to that, you have, what figures do appear in... What's that? Sorry, I missed that.
I was going to say in Scotland as well.
Yes. Throughout all of the islands there. And the figures show something of a Byzantine influence, which can easily be explained by, the missionaries carrying books from different places that help to transmit artistic traditions. And all of this is coming together in a time and place in which you have two different sets of missionaries with, one is the older mission that, is sort of emanating out of Iona and all of the disciples of St. Columba. And the other is the new Roman mission coming with, from Augustine of Canterbury. And, these two sort of religious schools had some disagreements, liturgical ones, over things like the date of Easter and the proper shape of the tonsure, but there are also reconciliations between them. St. Cuthbert was one of the major figures trying to reconcile them. And so this is not just some isolated, one ethnic group, one language, one religious tradition, one location. We think of it as being so peculiar, but it is remarkably cosmopolitan in terms of you can see influence from all over the world at this point, reflected in this artwork that comes together and contributes to it. And that, I think, is what really surprised me about it.
Yeah.
I'd say it leads well to your image of Our Lady Undoer of Knots, when you can see a global influence in this image.
Yeah.
So,
yes, the knots and braids are definitely from the Celtic style. I mean, the central figure of Mary has some obvious similarities to the Virgin of Guadalupe. Mm-hmm. And the devotion itself is from a Baroque painting. I don't remember the name of the original artist, but I've copied a few details from that, like the presence of Tobit and Raphael in the background. And then the sort of architecture in the background is, that's a muqarnas. That's an architectural feature that is common in Islamic architecture, particularly Persian. And then between the mandorla and the border is sort of a fill that is composed of letters. If you look at it closely, it says Salve Regina Maria Virgo. And it's repeated in a way, it's sort of rotated and repeated. And the letters are built entirely out of just orthogonal units. And that is a decorative technique that is most commonly seen in Islamic art. You see this particularly in tile patterns very often. It's the lettering style is called square Kufic, Kufic being one of the most highly stylized forms of Arabic calligraphy. But square Kufic is stylized to the point where it's where it looks like it's just it's completely orthogonal. And I've done the same thing here, just using letters of the Latin alphabet. So yeah, there's a lot of different things that I'm sort of brought together here.
It's really beautiful, really fascinating. And I just want to encourage, if you're listening, you should be looking Yeah. So
Yeah, definitely. And then you had mentioned earlier incorporating some Japanese art. This is one of my favorites. Earlier in a previous episode on angels, we had shared your image of Saint Michael, the archangel, which is fabulous. But this one's a little different from that. And we have Our Lady of Perpetual Help. And I love the elements that you kept the same, and then yet those that are different. So how did you come about this? And just, what inspired you to kind of bring all of this together into one?
Well, I can't really take personal credit for the idea of depicting these religious subjects in the style of Japanese woodblock prints. That was an idea that was brought to me by a patron who said, could you try to do this? And I said, well, sure, I'll try. And the first one that I made was a smaller version of the St. Michael drawing that you saw. And it proved to be very popular, and more people started coming to me with these ideas. And so most of them were suggested to me by my patrons rather than ones that I thought of on my own. But once I was given the task of sort of translating the version of Perpetual Help into the style of Japanese art, I was given an interesting challenge because a lot of the subject matter of the ukiyo-e is not really... it's not of any religious significance at all. I mean, the whole style is meant to celebrate some of the ephemeral pleasures of life, and so a lot of it is pictures of geisha or of kabuki actors, and I didn't want to use anything that was inappropriate as a model, and so I was looking for an example of something to not to copy, but to use as like the main inspiration for the picture that would be, would be respectful. And so the picture that I drew most of my inspiration from for this particular project was it was a Chujo Hime and the Spirit of Her Wicked Stepmother by Yoshitoshi, who was one of the last great masters of the Japanese woodblock print. And Chujo Hime is sort of a Cinderella type figure. She was abused by her stepmother because she was so devoted to her deceased mother that she incessantly was praying for her soul, constantly saying her rosary. This would be obviously the Buddhist rosary, but they have prayer beads as part of that religious tradition as well. And the print also showed like this her wicked stepmother's spirit taking the form of a snake that was like striking at Chujo Hime's heel. And so I thought, this has got a lot of resonances here. There's a lot of things that could be reinterpreted as Marian imagery. So I didn't put the snake in because it's Our Lady of Perpetual Help, but as far as okay, let's do the rosary. Let's maybe do the lotus leaf. That's kind of conveniently placed behind the head to suggest a halo. That was an idea I got from that particular print. I think that the Japanese styled art is a little more difficult for me to integrate into my own sort of hybrid style. But one thing that I really, really appreciate about it is that it sort of solved an old difficulty I had, which was how to depict figures in space without relying on cast shadows to establish their position. Because I think you mentioned you'd read my Heavenly Outlook lecture, that it's important to me to consider that like the light source is God, and that is sort of behind the viewer. And so I don't like having a lot of I don't really draw with a lot of chiaroscuro. I like to have kind of eliminate shadows as much as I can, but that can be kind of limiting in terms of making the picture intelligible. And so, had spent years thinking, like, do I really need to start hatching all this? Do I need to start changing my techniques? And then when I started studying the Japanese woodblock prints more, I realized that these artists are very, very good at making very intelligible pictures of all sorts of spaces with almost no use of cast shadows. And it has to do with the way that they use sort of overlapping patterns and juxtapositions of different areas of color. And so that is a lesson that I've really taken out of that style of art and apply in many, many drawings that I make.
Yeah, nice. This is actually one of my favorite pieces that you've done. I absolutely love it. I could stare at it all day.
Yeah, it's fabulous.
Yeah.
Coming back around, this image I just happened upon when I was looking through your work for this podcast. And instantly I found myself lost and at home with it, lost in the fact that there were so many things to look at. And so I could let myself get lost in the work. And to me, I think that's an important element of sacred art. You want something that draws you in, keeps you there, and has you contemplating what's being presented. And at the same time at home, because again, you've put down so many familiar little animals and the morel mushrooms, the porcupine. So it's neat how you can feel at home, timeless, apart from the world, and yet all in this image of the Last Supper and the washing of the feet. And this actually reflects an image that Alix and I had shared in a previous podcast for the Last Supper that Alix found in a pub in England.
Yeah.
So if you could kind of tell us like what inspires you, just kind of mixing these different images together with the Last Supper and the washing of the feet.
Well, the origin of this particular drawing is that I was commissioned to make a set of altar cards, which is a very large project and a very big piece of calf skin. And running along the bottom, I wanted these different scenes from the life of Christ in the badpage. And I didn't want, because the calligraphy and everything was already done, I didn't want to be drafting them on the altar cards, and so I made these smaller studies, these smaller drawings, and it's actually a set of 3, so 6 scenes that would go onto this particular onto this larger drawing, that I did the miniatures on a separate piece of calf skin first. And so this one with the 2 scenes from Maundy Thursday, I think that I mostly looked at 15th century miniatures and panel paintings for the scenes, and then I surrounded them with some of the knot work that you would associate with the Celtic style. But the border is more inspired by millefleur tapestries, which is a particular style of tapestry that was made in the 15th and 16th centuries. And, probably the most famous ones are like the Lady and the Unicorn that they have in New York.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
And I have always loved this style of tapestry and found it so appealing. And for years, I just couldn't figure out how they were done. And then, on the recommendation of some friends of mine, I went to see an art exhibit in the Art Museum in Chicago, where I was living, and I stood in front of this one particular millefleur tapestry that was there, and I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. I understand. Mm-hmm. It was just a very simple thing about not overlapping the different parts of the plants. Mm-hmm. But once I just figured that that little key, I found that I could actually draw in this style, and that's actually become my favorite and most commonly used sort of ornamental fill that I've done ever since. In this case, some of these animals are ones that I'm just really fond of, or that I'm just having fun drawing. I mean, the opossums are just you don't, obviously it's a New World animal, so you don't see it in Gothic art. But I mean, I like possums. I think they're fun looking, and they're just really interesting creatures. Sometimes I put in animals or plants just because they're familiar. Things I see in my yard. I draw a lot of frogs. I draw a lot of bats. I draw a lot of poison ivy because that's the one plant that I can definitely recognize immediately, and so I can draw it very easily because of all the plants that I've trained myself to recognize. That's probably the one that's clearest. But the porcupine you've highlighted there, that one, that's got a little more of a story because I saw in a book, not in person, but I saw this wonderful tapestry. It's a choir tapestry, so like a big long one that would hang behind the choir stalls in a medieval church. And I think it's from France, and it was episodes from the life of Saint Stephen. And I don't remember the exact details of the narrative, but at one point in the hagiography, it says that the animals, the beasts, came and reverenced the body of Stephen. And in this tapestry, they had, like a leopard and a handful of these animals, and one of them was this very wonderfully rendered porcupine. And so I have had that picture in my mind of that particular porcupine. And this one that I drew is obviously much simpler. I mean, that's only like, less than half an inch tall. But it looks a little bit like that porcupine.
Nice.
So how do you like working on calfskin?
Yeah, I was just thinking that as well. Yeah.
We talked about that in our previous episode.
It's a lot more precise than paper. It's a lot more precise than paper. Paper, like if you look at paper under a microscope, it's like all these sort of jumbled plant fibers just mashed together and in every which direction and just flattened out. That's what paper is. So if you put like ink to that, it's going to bleed kind of in all directions. Whereas an organized layer of skin cells is not going to have that same effect. And it's also much easier to make corrections because since it's organized in layers of skin cells, you can just scrape it off very easily. So I like that about it. I like its translucency because sometimes I can get interesting effects by drawing on both sides, and then you can hold it up to a light and see some effects of that sort.
Nice. Is that hard to source?
Also, it's very sturdy, so it's my preferred material. It's there are like 3 places you can get it now, and I'm always concerned that one of them is going to go out of business, and then I'll have to go to and then that'll affect the prices. But it's still available. You can get it from Pergamena in New York. You can get it from I forget what the name of the one in England is, but and there was one in Wisconsin that I used to get it from, but they sort of. I don't know that they're still in business, but they weren't able to fulfill my orders in the time frame that I needed. Now, goat skin is much easier to obtain because you can just go on like Etsy and you can get goat skin from, there's suppliers in like Turkey, there's suppliers in India, there's suppliers in Israel that I've bought from. And it's not as nice, but for like one-sided drawings where it's not translucent, it's pretty good. It's thicker.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, but the nice thing about this vellum is it could be around for 1,000+ years.
Yeah.
As long as it's looked after. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite archival too. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to come back to the ancillary fathers here of Celtic art. We have St. Columba, Columkill, and St. Cuthbert. So, do you feel like you are continuing on what they have begun and kind of bringing it to the modern world?
I certainly hope so. I hope that they are pleased with what I'm doing. It's Columba is, he's obviously an extremely well-known saint in Ireland, but in the United States, he's not necessarily that well known, and yet I've received more commissions to draw Saint Columba than almost anybody else over the years. Aside from like obvious ones like Mary. But I think I've drawn like 5 or 6 or maybe even 7 drawings of Saint Columba. So maybe there's something that he keeps trying to reach out to me more than I to him. But
That's fascinating.
I do hope that.
Yeah, but why do you think that is?
I can't explain it really.
That's really fascinating.
Alex, I was hoping you'd know because you've done your own drawing of column kill, Alex. So
that's true. I have, and I've been to Iona as well, so several times. And I have to say, it's worth going to. I have to encourage you to if you could ever go, that's the place to go, and maybe it'll all make sense to you. But no, I don't know. I mean, I know he's the patron saint of like. Not bookkeepers, but like libraries and things like that. I don't know if he's such an appealing saint. He whenever I've read about him, he just seems like he would be someone you'd really be happy to know. You know, fascinating saint, if you can believe what's written about him, and I do, because it was written that by the following the successor abbot on Iona. So there.
And Alex can speak to the fact that I love maps, and I love that in St. Cuthbert of Lindisfarne you have the map of the island.
Yeah.
We had a chance to go. Yeah. Alex and I talked about it in one of our podcasts. So it is great place to go visit and see. So
it is very fun. It is.
And are either one of them your patron saint, or who is your patron saint?
Yeah, who's your patron saint?
I don't know that I have a particular patron. I mean, I'd say that my strongest devotion would be to John the Baptist and John the Apostle. I've enormous respect and devotion for these two figures. I mean, they're so pivotal in the development of the art that's so meaningful to me. Probably Eadfrith of Lindisfarne is the one that I would invoke most often among the saints of that era, because he's the one who is actually created the Lindisfarne Gospels.
Yeah, that's right.
And is a canonized saint and recognized as a saint.
Nice.
Yeah.
Speaking of saints, I have never heard of this saint until I saw this picture. How do you say her name?
I would say
I believe it's Gobnate. This was a commission and from a woman who is a scholar of the Irish language, and she instructed me on how to write all this, and gave me fairly specific instructions. So this is not one that I knew myself before I received the commission. I believe she is a patroness of beekeepers, and that's why there's the skep and the bees. I don't remember the exact details, but the 6 verse 8. The white deer, however many there are, I guess there's 9 there. Those are from one of the stories of her life, and I don't remember the details of it, unfortunately. The cats, I believe, were a request from the patron of personal significance, rather than something that from her story, if I remember correctly. This was a while ago. I don't remember all the details.
Yeah. No,
it's fun how the cats fit in.
That this is. Yeah, I was just going to say about that is I do recall that I did take an inspiration from the Japanese artist Kunayoshi for my idea of how to use the cats, because if you know Kunayoshi, he's another one of these woodblock masters, and he was very famously a cat lover. You see a picture, a portrait of him. He's always like covered in cats. And he also drew some of these prints where he would have these words that were spelled out in Japanese, but the letters would be composed entirely of like cats stretched in different positions or like all bunched together. And so I was thinking of him when I put those into the large insular G there.
Yeah. No, it actually reminds me I just love the way they do stretch and move around, because it kind of, they help the eye move around the image itself. So it's really, really beautiful. And I love bees, and I love cats, and so this is it's got all the elements for me. And there's a saint.
Yeah, we had a fun introduction to cats and manuscripts when we did a review of Secrets of Kells. I don't know if you've seen Cartoon Salon's movie The Secret of Kells?
Yeah.
I have, yes. I saw it. I saw it pretty recently, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. The character Pagerbond.
Yeah, I like the movie a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is based on I think a poem that was written in the margins of a manuscript. Which I knew about that independently before I'd seen the movie. That I actually had somebody request a bookplate made that was about Pongerbond the cat. But yeah, that's from a medieval manuscript.
Yeah, it's
Nice.
interesting if you start studying medieval manuscripts. I said this, I think, in the episode about The Secret of Kells. The number of manuscripts that have cat paw prints in them, it's quite remarkable.
So yeah. So do you have anything new you're working on, or new designs, or?
Well, I can show you this one. I've got this fairly large for me drawing of the resurrection, which is about a day of solid work from being completed.
Wow.
And that's the big project right now. After that, there's a number of calligraphic works that I'm planning to work on, and a few more biblical scenes. And I've got a few new typefaces also in the works. So that's what's occupying me right now.
Yeah. So you mentioned your typefaces, which I think are absolutely fabulous. I love the styling and the options that you offer with the typefacings. They're very inspirational. There's times I am incorporating lettering into my embroidery work, and those have helped me kind of come up with a better shape for a letter just to get it to fit better. So how can people find those typefaces and use them?
Well, if you go to my website, there's a section on there for graphic design, and if you click through that, there's a section for typefaces, and you can, you can follow the links there. I mean, the files are stored on my Patreon account, but they're easier to find through my website. And so that's the place to get them. Is you go to my website, graphic design section, typefaces section, and I really love typeface design. It's something that I have to sort of pace myself with because it's not the most lucrative sort of work that I do, and it's quite time consuming, but I do think it's important. So I have, probably a dozen typefaces where I have the character sets completely ready, but I just have not gone through the process of, vectorizing them and turning them into something that's a workable font yet. I even have some that are in the Celtic style of calligraphy, but they probably won't be available for at least another year. The one I'm working on now is display capitals in a medieval style that have lots of little plants and animals and mushrooms and things sort of inside the letters. So
nice.
I hope that people will really enjoy that one.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Your website has so many different options on there. And I love that you've taken some of your pattern work and actually put it at a site where you can buy fabric with the pattern work on it. So it's like a neat option with your work, especially with the way that it's filled in so beautifully and incorporates one to the other.
Thank you. So, the interesting thing about the fabric work is that when people buy it, it shows up in some very interesting places that you don't expect.
Quite honestly, there's been some patterns.
Yeah, there was actually
would make great chapel veils.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, if you get some lace makers to...
I know at least one of them wound...
Yeah. So,
at least one of them wound up on a movie set because I got a notice from the clearance people for it.
Oh, wow. Do you know which movie?
Right. It's something. It was something on. It's something on like Disney Plus. I don't remember what. I don't know if it actually wound up in the movie or not. But I got a form asking me to just grant permission to allow them to buy it and put it on there, put it in the set design. So I don't want to say it because I've not actually watched and spotted where it is, but it might be on some upholstery somewhere in there.
Okay. That's so cool. That's so cool. Well, if I can take a moment now, we'd like to thank our patrons. You mentioned your patrons. We'd like to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Sacred Art, including Stephen H., Teresa N., Samuel C., Ian S., and Nick W. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Sacred Art and all the shows on StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for joining us. And we'll be putting a link in our show notes to your website, which is nice and easy to find, danielmitsui.com. And we hope our viewers will go explore and check it out and jump on Discord and tell us what your favorite images are from Daniel.
Yeah, absolutely. And explore his website, read his lectures. They're really well written and they're interesting, and I just enjoyed, I think I read about 3 of them just to kind of get a feel for kind of where you are in your head. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I just want to encourage our listeners and viewers to do the same.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate that too.
Yeah.
So thank you for listening to The Secrets of Sacred Art on StarQuest. To find previous episodes of The Secret of Sacred Art and send feedback, please visit us at sqpn.com/sacredart. You can send us comments by email, sacredart@sqpn.com, or by leaving us a comment on YouTube, or please visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/discord.
We'll be back next time, and when we're going to be discussing the Lindisfarne Gospels. And until then, I'm Alix Murray.
And I'm Kathryn Laffrey, hoping you find something beautiful.
Bye-bye.
Join a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to go on pilgrimage to the mysterious shrines and sites of Italy in the Jubilee year 2025 with Jimmy Aiken and me, Dom Bettinelli. Go with us on a 12-day, all-inclusive tour that gives you incredible access to Jimmy's insights in Rome, Assisi, Orvieto, Monte Cassino, San Giovanni Rotondo, the Grotto of St. Michael, and more. We're also planning special activities like recording on location for future episodes of Mysterious World, and an in-person Weird Questions episode just for pilgrims. Space is limited and filling up, so be sure to find out more. Visit mysterious.fm/Italy 2025 to reserve your spot today. That's mysterious.fm/Italy 2025.